Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, a GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I'll be reacting to Who Am I? AncestryDNA and 23andMe Results Update by Ash Serrano. This is a very small channel. She only has 1.43 thousand subscribers, so pretty small, but up there. But the video does have 2.3 thousand views. This is a very recent video from August 29th of this year, and I'm really looking forward to this because this is an update from her old results, or at least that's what I assume she means. So I'm hoping that she'll show her old results and the new results, and will give a good idea of how they can change. Being that this video was in August of this year, I don't know if this will include the most recent Ancestry updates, which I believe came this month in September. I'm shooting this right on the last day of September at this point. But I could be wrong. These may have been the most recent updates on Ancestry back in August. But I'm hoping that this will be really interesting, especially because based on the title, she mentions European, Native American, and African. So I'm imagining she must have a fairly mixed ancestry. And if it's a fairly mixed ancestry, that means that we may see some big changes in some of these results. But before I jump into the video, please be sure to give this a thumbs up. It really does help me out. And click the subscribe button and click that bell for notifications on future videos. I'll also be posting a lot of my videos early on Patreon, so if you'd like early access to videos, please become one of my supporters on Patreon. And also be sure to check out my merch store, which I will be linking down below. But now with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into the video.
Today I wanted to make a video about the 23andMe and AncestryDNA updates. My results have changed drastically, so I just wanted to get on here and talk a little bit about how and why that happens. So I see a lot of comments on my feed that talk about how these DNA tests are anecdotal and that they're not accurate. I do kind of want to address that a little bit. So the more people that take these DNA tests, the better the results will be. So that's why they update your results periodically.
Very true.
It's because they have new data to support what different markers in your DNA represent in terms of your ancestral DNA. So on mine, my previous results, I can link below the two different videos that I made for 23andMe and Ancestry. So you can go back and look at what the previous results were. Kind of higher level stuff, you know, broad, oh, Native American or African descent. Now, the new algorithms are showing a subset that dives a little bit deeper into actually where my ancestors were from. So the first one I want to talk about is AncestryDNA's update. So when you go to the app, they have a lot of new functions, but we're just going to focus on the DNA right now and the ethnicity estimate. So on mine, it updated maybe a little less than a year ago, and I just have been procrastinating and making this video given the coronavirus. So in my results, you can see it's a little more detailed. It's breaking it down by almost by country instead of region. I hate to look down. So similarly, I have 38% England, Wales, and Northwestern Europe. Before, I think it was, it broke out England and then had Wales, Scotland, and Ireland together. So now they've kind of broken England and Wales into one, and then Ireland and Scotland into another. So I also have 17% French, which I believe is different than last time. Let me just...
Yeah, I hope she just shows the old results on the screen. That'd be easier than going back and seeing the old videos.
So previously, I just went and pulled them up, my previous results. So I had 37% Great Britain and 13% Iberian Peninsula, 13% Ireland, Scotland, Wales, 12% Scandinavia, 9% Native American, then kind of that high level Europe West, Europe South. Then there was Finland in there, Africa North,
Caucasus.
Go watch that other video. I do the same thing. Caucasus, Mali, and Senegal. So in my updated results, we are showing, so they did Great Britain before, now it's England and Wales and Northwestern Europe as 38%. I have France 17%, which is interesting because that was not on there before.
I think what's happening with the French, because if you see the Portugal and Spain, they're only 2% each. My guess is some of that Iberian they've realized was France, which does make sense because if you look at the history, especially going back to the Visigoths going into the Iberian Peninsula, it's very likely that there are some distant relations between Spanish and Portuguese population groups today and French population groups today.
14% Ireland and Scotland, 9% Norway, when before it was Scandinavia, so that's interesting. It does have Indigenous Americas instead of Native American now, so Indigenous Americas Central, and then it refers back to Panama, which is where my family is from. And then 5% Sweden, then it's Indigenous Americas, Colombia, and Venezuela, Portugal, Spain, Senegal, and Sardinia. And then Nigeria, and then also Indigenous Haiti and Dominican Republic. So it's a little bit different. It's definitely a little more detailed. What I like about this new function is that you can click through on specific areas and learn more about the different reference populations that they're looking at, as well as kind of where your DNA is showing up. So for me, obviously in Panama, I do have a lot of recent ancestry from there, and they build a community around the people that you're matched with and your family. So I think it's pretty cool. I love this new update. What I like about this is it links me back to Panama, which of course is the biggest reason why I got so invested in AncestryDNA, is just really wanting to understand more about what being Panamanian, being Latin American means, because it is such a mix. And so for me, it's really interesting to see, it does tie me back to Panama, as well as the African, the European.
Okay, this is a great comparison spot here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it does make sense. It is interesting how Ancestry, slightly changes their definition of each population group. So like Great Britain becomes England, Wales, and Northwestern Europe. And then Ireland, Scotland, and Wales loses the Wales and just becomes Ireland and Scotland. But that's likely just because when they're going through these new population group studies, they're able to better determine certain population groups and are then deciding, well, let's change the population definition of those groups. And I imagine, too, if you go and look at the white papers, the precision and recall numbers vary as well. Yeah, this is a great example of how you can find your results changing. Yeah, let's continue watching.
And the Native American, so I think that's pretty cool. So that's the AncestryDNA update.
Now for 23andMe.
So now we'll talk about the 23andMe update.
Show the confidence slider. Show the confidence slider.
The Ancestry update, and I just never made an updated video, so I figured we'd just do it all in one. Previously, it showed my genetic makeup to be overarching 88.3% European, then 7.7% Native American. I'm looking back at my previous results. And then 1.8% Sub-Saharan African. So the update is about the same in terms of the big, broader chunk breakdown. I'm sorry, I'm looking over here, not here, not at this thing, sorry. But it is a little bit more in depth because in the update, it's gonna link you back to actual like cities that your ancestors are from, which I think is pretty cool. So as you can see on here, my biggest chunk is Northwestern European, as before it was as well. I think, yeah, it was before. So my mom is like 100% English, so this makes sense. So it ties back to British and Irish, 34.1% British and Irish. And then if you click on that, it will show you where your ancestors were from, like what cities. So if you're like me and you're like, I want to go do a DNA tour of where my family's from, this would make it a little bit easier, to be honest. So you can see here, it shows highly likely match of where my family members were from, and then it shows possible matches. So it shows possible matches of 4 different places in Ireland. But
well, looking at these cities on 23andMe to find as she said, a tour of where your ancestors came from, I'm sure it would be useful, especially for someone who doesn't have the ability to do their family history, to do their genealogy for whatever reason. Then this would be the most useful. But personally, if you have the ability to do your family history, to do your genealogy and trace it back, that's the best way to figure out how to do a family history tour. Because when you not only know where your family came from, but you have the documented evidence, then you get a lot better information. You can get addresses where they lived. You can get places where they worked. You can literally go visit the buildings that your ancestors were in and were part of their lives. So I think she does make a good point. If you're looking to do a tour of Europe and you want to figure out where your family lived and tour based that way, this is a great way to start. But the best way would literally be doing your genealogy.
These highly likely in the United Kingdom. So London, which makes sense if you think about like ancestors probably lived in bigger, ports and cities, and then they came over. That makes sense to me. I thought that was pretty cool. So that's that piece. So 34.1% British and Irish, 22.3% French and German, 4% Scandinavian, and 15.9% broadly Northwestern European. As you can see, they don't break it down for like possibility to be from the different cities or regions in the lower percentages, which kind of sucks because of course like you want to see that, but then
I was saying I hope she shows a confidence slider, but I just realized if she's on the app, I don't know if they have the confidence slider on the app. Personally, I don't like using the apps for looking at DNA test results, especially because usually I'm using the DNA results for looking at genetic matches, and it's really annoying to try to look through your genetic matches on a cell phone.
And of course, 9.3% Southern European, so Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and then broadly European. Then we get to East Asia, Native American, 6.9% Native American. And then I think the Sub-Saharan African's about the same, but it does break down now further in like more detail in like what countries.
See, that's really interesting that here it has Sub-Saharan African for her, and then for the Ancestry results, it had Africa North Africa. I think in both of her results it had that. I don't remember all of the small trace results that were like all 1%, because I mean 2.1% Sub-Saharan African, that's not, I mean that's kind of a trace result. I mean when you're over 2%, it's a little bit better, but it's still somewhat trace. And especially when you see the breakdown, and the breakdown gets even more trace, 1.2% Senegambian and Guinean, 0.6% Nigerian, and yeah, so I don't know. I'd be curious to see if what's going on here as results update, and see, does 23andMe update and change it to North African? Does Ancestry end up updating and changing it to West African? Is it maybe that she's coming from a population where there was a migration from West Africa to North Africa, or North Africa to West Africa, and then she descends from that? That's the really interesting thing about a lot of these results that you'll get from people, is what it shows you doesn't really tell you the actual story behind what's going on. And these companies may not fully understand it for years until they have a population study that can show them, oh, well, there was this migration that then we can link to this population group, and now we can better define these DNA markers to this specific population and not just saying West African or North African.
So now mine shows, instead of Sub-Saharan African, which it showed before, now it shows Senegambian and Ghanaian, I think that's how you say it, and Nigerian. And then what's really cool about this update is it shows my recent ancestry in the Americas. So if you click on Mexico and Central America.
Yeah, I already saw it said Panama.
You can see that I have highly likely match. Why is it so hard to say? Highly likely match in Panama. And what's crazy is that the regions or the towns that they're representing here are actually where my family's from.
I think the way that they come up with these maps, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure the way they come up with these maps here is that they are using her actual genetic matches. So when you go on 23andMe, you put in your maternal grandfather, maternal grandmother, paternal grandfather, and paternal grandmother's locations, and then you can put in locations of other ancestors. So it's probably likely that it's showing all of these because these are the amount of genetic matches who are, she has a whole lot of genetic matches who are in these certain areas that are saying that they're from these certain areas. And so then it's telling her, well, this is more likely just because you already have a whole bunch of genetic matches who come from that area.
So,
which actually, I just want to jump in and say that is a technique that we use in genetic genealogy. If I had an adoptee I'm working with and I'm looking at their DNA matches and, they were adopted in Virginia, but I'm seeing a whole bunch of DNA matches where they have ancestral roots in North Carolina, and especially if these are closer relatives, then I can, even though the adoptee was adopted in Virginia or born in Virginia, I can make the assumption that they likely have an ancestral tie to North Carolina, and thus they likely have ancestors who lived in North Carolina. So basically, 23andMe is kind of doing that same thing here.
Be it anecdotal, be it inaccurate, for me, my stuff's pretty spot on in terms of the Panamanian descent. So I really think that they're pretty similar between the two. I'm going to compare both of them in a second, but I think they're pretty similar, to be honest. So I was pretty excited about these two updates. I like diving deeper into what it means to be Latin American, of course, and this stuff is just so cool to me. So here's the quick breakdown between the two results. As you can see, they're pretty close. So I went ahead and did some quick math, and 23andMe shows me at 76.3% Northwestern European, while AncestryDNA shows me at 83%. 23andMe shows me to be 9.3% Southern European, while Ancestry shows me at 5%. 23andMe shows me to be 7.6% Native American, while Ancestry shows me to be 10% Native American. And the African descent is about the same at 2% for both. So it's pretty close, in my opinion, between the two different results. I hope you like this update.
Okay, I just want to go back because I was looking at the African stuff and I just noticed I'd mentioned that it had said Africa North, and I got it wrong in saying that it said it in both the before and after update for Ancestry, but apparently it only showed it in the before, because looking now I can see that it gives Senegal, it gives Nigeria, which Nigeria, it matches right up. Senegal, it definitely is Senegambian. I'm assuming that is the connection. I don't know enough about Africa to say that for sure. So that Africa North did seem to point more towards West Africa, I guess. So it's interesting as these results constantly update. You're gonna constantly see that type of stuff. And even though it's very trace results with both AncestryDNA and 23andMe, doesn't necessarily mean it's untrue. It just means that it's not as likely to be able to prove in any sort of way.
Pretty close, in my opinion, between the two different results. I hope you like this update. Please, in the comments below, if you could tell me about your recent experiences. I'd love to learn more about that. I love talking to you guys when you comment on this stuff because I'm such a DNA fanatic. I love it so much, and even people on my Instagram will talk about it, so it's really exciting. So I love hearing about your journeys, so keep me posted on yours and I'll keep you posted on mine. Talk soon.
All right, well, that was a really good video. I think she has a great grasp on what's going on with these DNA tests, especially what she mentions in the beginning of the video. She definitely understands how these DNA tests work in the very basic sense, which a lot of people don't even get that. A lot of people are just like, oh, I take DNA and they tell me where I come from. She understands that it's not just the countries that you're coming from necessarily, because the definition of a country is defined by a border, and those borders have changed constantly. She seems to understand that this is based more on the actual population groups. Really great video in showing how these results can change, showing how, the actual, what you can expect from the results changing. She didn't dive too much into the trace results, which is great because trace results really don't matter that much. But what is interesting when it comes to trace results and looking at the updates is seeing which ones are still there and which ones disappear. So you did notice some good changes in terms of how they define things, how they, define the population groups. You see the changes in the percentages, the updates, how they can become more precise. And she even says it in the beginning, the more people that take these DNA tests, the more population groups that they study, the more that happens, the better they're going to be with their results and the more that they're going to be able to give you better defined information. So really great video overall. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.